clearly a multiple vortex tornado. You've got these vortices rotating around a common axis, which is the core of this tornado. And again, more than likely, this is right on top of downtown Cullman right now. So again, the next call to action, if you are north or east of downtown Cullman, you need to be in a safe place. Clearly, everybody in downtown Cullman has to be in a safe place right now. So at this point, we are asking that everybody in Tuscaloosa and Northport, based on that live stream, to be in a safe place. Small room, lowest floor, near the center, away from windows. This includes the campus of the University of Alabama, as we are now looking at a large, violent wedge tornado that is near the Tuscaloosa-Greene County line. This is a large multiple vortex tornado that is almost into downtown Tuscaloosa. And again, you should have been in your safe place 20 minutes ago. But if by chance you're hearing me at the last minute on the radio, get into a safe place right now. Look at that. Goodness gracious. This will be a day that will go down in state history. And all you can do is pray for those people. Let's pan over to the left.
Oh my goodness. Look at that.
Are you kidding me?
Look at all the stuff flying around up there.
That's coming over near Interstate 359 in Skyland. Nobody should be out there.
A few moments ago, I had an opportunity in Air 1 to observe the damage from about 500 feet, and to say the least, it is massive. I would estimate on a 3 to 4 mile stretch of the city, at some parts more than a half-mile wide, we have utter destruction. We have neighborhoods that have basically been removed from the map. We have businesses that will no longer be able to engage in commerce. And we've got thousands upon thousands of citizens who have lost all of their possessions. Of course, the most tragic thing about what has transpired since yesterday afternoon is we now have 36 confirmed deaths within the city. Well over 600 injuries that are directly related to yesterday's tornado.
The storm itself was scary, but the scariest part was after that quiet. And hearing people yelling for help and not being able to do anything because you're the person that needs help too.
It was eerily quiet out here, and I could hear some voices on the street, and so I was able to stand and I couldn't see above the debris, but I was able to raise one arm. There was enough room to get that one arm up, and I just started yelling for help.
I'm in my living room watching TV, and I look out the window and hear crashing, and I see the tornado over the corner of the building, and I knew it was coming right at me, so I took cover, did what I could, and the Lord smiled on me yesterday.
April 2011, there was a series of tornadoes that hit in Alabama, and it was very public. It was very much on all the media sites. And I remember watching it and reading about it and thinking, we should do something. Now, I didn't know what "we" was, and I didn't know what "do something" meant. But this thought just kept resonating in my head. We should do something. And so the day after the storm, I sent out a mass text to 100 people. I said, hey guys, I don't know what you have going on in the next couple weeks, but I just feel like a bunch of us should go help out down in Alabama after this series of tornadoes. Within a day, there were 14 people who had responded and said, yeah, that'd be great, let's go.
It was on the national news, and that following Sunday we were in church and sitting there, and our pastor had announced that our youth pastor Greg was going to take a group of volunteers, whoever he could get, in a few days down to Pleasant Grove to help the victims, help clean up. So when I heard that, I was at a point in my life that my kids were grown up. I was looking, what can I do with the next phase of my life? And it was a God moment. The light went on. I said, this is it. I turned to my husband, Jim, and I said, I'm going.
The reason I wanted to go to Pleasant Grove is it was recent. I think it was the week of that we went down there. Past events had been, months to even years afterwards. So it was still fresh, and I wanted to get down there right after it happened.
I'm not sure what it was about Pleasant Grove specifically that made my heart break, but I also felt a nudge, almost, if you will, from God. And I specifically remember going immediately to my Facebook page and posting on my status, who is going to help? I'm going to come jump in the van, what church is going. I just felt like I really, really needed to be there.
And so within a few days, we jumped in the vehicle and we drove down. And it was a 14-hour drive. The city we went to was Pleasant Grove, Alabama, just outside of Birmingham, about a half hour from Tuscaloosa. And they had National Guard set up all around the city. You couldn't just go in just to gawk. You had to have a reason to be there. They were trying to keep looters and people who shouldn't be there out, so that the people who needed to do the work could be in and work. Their curfew was 9 p.m. And so we left very early in the morning and got there 8:55 on a Saturday night. And we met the National Guard at their checkpoint and they waved us in. Now, this is a week after the storm, so keep in mind, the power is not back on. And the sun was down. It was late at night. So we could not see what we were driving into kind of fully. We could kind of tell that there was some damage. We could see within a little bit of us, but we couldn't tell for sure exactly everything that had happened.
When we got to the Pleasant Grove United Methodist Church, it was very, very late. I think it was 11 o'clock at night, so it was dark. So we pulled in and had no idea our surroundings, what it looked like. And I remember just walking down the street and was so overwhelmed and consumed with emotion. You can try to explain it to people over and over what you visually saw and all the pictures I took with my camera, but it doesn't do you can't protect your heart at all from seeing something like that. And I found myself standing in the center of the street just weeping and sobbing. I remember seeing children's teddy bears that were covered in dirt and just thrown in the front yard of a house that used to stand there. Children's toys. I think the thing with the kids really hit home because I have 3 children of my own.
The church sat kind of up on a hill, and as we walked down the hill, it was like Armageddon. It was just, the hair stood up on my arms, and I'm getting teary-eyed now. I mean, that's how it was then. I'd never seen so much devastation, and it was like a war zone. It was like a bomb had fallen. The trees that were still left standing, the bark was off the trees. Houses, we would walk down the street, and what was left of a house, if there was anything, there was an entire roof, 2 lots down. It was, I had never seen anything like that.
I mean, there's mattresses and trees, cars flipped. I mean, there's no good explanation for it other than complete devastation.
So the next morning was Sunday morning. It was 6 a.m. and it was the first Sunday worship service that the church was going to have since this storm had ripped through their town. 6 a.m., a bunch of us get up and we're eager to see what we're dealing with. And so we walked out of the church and we went down the street. And what we saw is it looked like if God had a lawnmower that was 1.5 miles wide. He just took it over the town. There were trees that were hundreds of feet tall that were left as just 8-foot stubs. And all of the trees were that way. And so some of these stubs had debris that were wrapped in them. Some of them had mattresses. There was one stub that actually had a car up in the tree. And if you looked at the houses and the lots, you would walk along and it would be just a pile of rubble and then another pile of rubble. There would be a house that would have maybe one room that wasn't destroyed, that was still together. It looked like an IKEA catalog, just picture of a bedroom, but the rest of the house was destroyed around it. And it was as far as you could see and as far as we could walk. We went 4 blocks and we were surrounded by devastation. It was Armageddon. And we were overwhelmed. It was, I'll never forget that day. It makes you think, what must it have been like to be the person who's in that house?
I went into the closet. I had a little closet in the center of the house. And I went in and I took my radio, my cell phone, and of all things, my car keys, and my Bible, and a puzzle book I was looking at, and a flashlight. And I thought, well, I'll just sit here like I have through other tornado warnings, and I'll work on my puzzle. And it was as if something put his hands over my eyes, or I closed my eyes. The next moment, and I'm saying moment now, it wasn't a minute, it was a moment. I was sitting in the middle of nothing. The walls are gone, I could see just stumps of trees sticking up. I couldn't see a house anywhere.
People told us that it was going to hit here. My wife and I went to the basement. We have a basement under our house, and we have a corner of the basement we consider our safe room. We went down there, and when the storm hit, we could hear trees falling on the house. They made big thumps on the roof. And we come up, and the trees had fallen into 2 of our bedrooms, almost destroying the rooms, and there was a large tree laying on our bed that we normally sleep in.
Another amazing thing to this is that storm took my house completely away, left that one little wall corner, that closet that I was sitting in, and I have no remembrance of anything that it even lifted me off of that chair. And somewhere up the road, somebody hollered, "Do you need help?" I don't know where they saw us. My daughter yelled yes just as loud as she could, and almost instantly there was about 5 men just showed up with us, and they just picked my chair up over those trees and telephone poles and carried us on up far enough to get us up to the road, where finally they got us down far enough the ambulance could get to us.
And it took us 2 or 3 days, mainly just walking around on foot, to locate everybody and to find out where they were and that they were okay or being cared for, or do something to help them move forward. And that was a pretty intense time. I actually spent most of my time, those first few days, on foot, walking around looking for people.
Well, I would say that I guess the human thing about it is how much help we got.
We had people that came from Michigan. We had people that came from New York. We had one guy that came from Hawaii, flew over here to help. I mean, people came from Florida. Just people came from all over the country to help. And it was extraordinarily inspiring to have all these people come in and participate.
They had this big, huge gym/auditorium, and it was just packed with donations, clothing, food, diapers, everything you can think of. Oh, tools, power tools, rakes, hammers, and it was just a mess. Things were just everywhere. So 3 of us stayed and just started organizing.
Our team would go out and we would patch roofs. We would move trees that had fallen on homes or in driveways or on roads. Our team would go alongside people and sort through the rubble of what used to be their home and help them try to salvage anything they could, whether it be pictures, jewelry, anything.
We sat down and just dug, and I found her car keys, and what The main thing she wanted was pictures of her granddaughter. She didn't care if we found anything else. She wanted any personal mementos, items that her grandmother had given her, pictures of her family. That's what she was most interested in. But she was thrilled I did find her car keys.
And so we did that for 3 days. And after 3 days, we drove back. And we're driving back, and I was moved by the experience. The drive home was a quiet one, I think because we were all very physically exhausted. It was in the mid-90s when we went down and we were doing all this work. But I was quiet because this was a new experience for me. I had been on mission trips before, but this was first response. This was relief efforts. This was kind of at the moment where everyone's nerves were stripped bare and everything was very new and real and emotional, and they just were desperate. They were at their rock bottom. And to be able to be at that moment and to be able to provide one thing for them, get them one step closer toward normalcy, it stuck with me.
Actually, tell you the truth, during the Pleasant Grove trip, I remember looking at Greg and just seeing some wheels turn. There was a fire that had got lit with him, and I think that trip really did change him. And I think that's kind of where the baby started.
After 6 months after the Alabama storm, lots of conversations started to happen between myself and my boss. And in January of 2012, we had a conversation and I just said, I can't do what I'm doing anymore. I feel like I'm pulled somewhere else. So I resigned.
I think DRAW came from the need that Greg saw in the disaster relief arena. There were needs that there were things that people needed that weren't getting to them after these disasters, whether it was a tornado or a hurricane or whatever it may be. And he took it upon himself to create a system to get those things to those people that needed them. So that's where DRAW came from.
One of the things we found when we would go to some of these areas that had been hit by natural disasters is that there were supplies that were being sent en masse that were almost overwhelming the area. For example, a month after I resigned, I took a small team to Henryville, Indiana, where a tornado had ripped apart the town. And when we showed up, there were so many cases of bottled water that had been donated that more of the cases were being used as anchors for tents than actually for drinking water for the people who lived there. When you would go to a relief site, tarps were like gold. You couldn't find tarps. When you found a tarp, you're like, oh, finally, we needed to patch this wall that had a giant hole in it, or a roof that the debris that had been picked up in the storm had ripped a hole in. Or someone else who maybe needed their bathroom supplies. They would have to go to one place to get their toothpaste and toothbrush. They would have to go to another place to get their soap and shampoo, another place to get their towels. And it didn't make sense. Why isn't it all in just one pack that you could just give somebody? Here's everything you need for your bathroom supplies as you take your next step toward recovery. And I kept asking these organizations that I would interview, and I'd say, do you guys do anything about these other things? I know you do food and you do that really well. I know that you do shelter, and that's great. You bring a lot of volunteers, but what about these supplies? And they say, well, that's not what we do. And so all these organizations that do great work, it seemed like there was this gap of supplies that could be given to people in mass after natural disasters. And so after a lot of thought, I started to have conversations with people that I trusted, people that I loved, people that I knew were equally as passionate about serving people as I was. And I said, what would it look like if we started an organization that was a disaster relief organization?
What I remember very clearly about DRAW coming into existence was a lunch that I had with Greg Martin. Greg, I could tell, was getting to the point where he was looking for some changes. He was looking for a different way to make a commitment to other people. And he had just gotten back from the Midwest Distribution Center, and he had seen some amazing things going on over there. And he said to me, "Tom, I think we could do the same thing right here in Oakland County. I think we could have our own organization that would come around and be a place for people in our community to work, to make a boots on the ground difference for people that are trying to recover from a very disastrous, heartbreaking situation."
His passion was disaster relief, helping others, and so he got me excited about it. And I just said, "I'm there for you. Whatever you decide to do, follow your heart and your passion." And he came up with the idea to do DRAW, disaster relief at work, and there was never any doubt that I was there to help him out. So I said, "Sign me up. I'm there."
We need a warehouse. We need to start. We could bring people in to help get this thing started. Of course, I thought, he's crazy. There's no way. But the more he was talking about it, the more I could see his enthusiasm was contagious, and that this thing would catch fire. Little did I dream that it would turn into the organization and the operation that it already has.
And so, in the middle of March 2012, I decided we should start an organization. Now, didn't have a ton of foresight. Didn't know what the organization would look like. Didn't even know the process of what it would look like to start a nonprofit or to become tax exempt. I didn't know what that was. And luckily I ran into a guy, Chuck White.
I'd say the most exciting thing watching the inception of DRAW is the bucket. We talked about trying to have a central theme that you could hang on to from a branding perspective, so you could recognize that this just wasn't another organization asking for money that you had no idea where it was going. So Greg and I sort of focused on coming up with an iconic visual, which is a 5-gallon bucket that basically has the DRAW logo on it, and he's found a way to utilize that through his experience to have different buckets that do different things at these disasters. One might have cleaning supplies, one might have some tarps for a roof, on and on. So I think that's become synonymous with DRAW. The logo on the side of the bucket, people seeing him and his team, the drummers that play on these things at some of the different fundraisers and memorial parades, things like that.
And we were in the parade on the 4th of July, and it was 190 degrees that day, but it was just an honor to be part of DRAW and walking down and everybody's cheering and the announcer explaining what DRAW was, and there's so many young people involved, which it just does my heart good to see all these, I call them kids, young adults with such a passion to help others.
It was happening so fast, and so many people jumped on board. I think back now, I'm still overwhelmed the number of people who said, "I want to help this idea," because it was just an idea. This idea that maybe this almost it was an idea that was brazen, that a bunch of people who didn't know the people that were going to be hit by storms, in fact, they didn't even know where the storm was going to hit, that somehow they could make a giant difference in people's lives immediately after a storm tore their life apart. And so it happened.
The thing that I really believe and that I've learned is that people want to help. Sometimes it's just knowing where to do that. And I really do believe, too, that, you know, there's a place for people wanting to just be able to support an organization, to be able to write a check and to do that. And then there's another place where people really do want to get involved, but they just don't know quite how to do that. I've had people tell me, oh, I've been on the Red Cross, you know, website too looking, but, you know, I'm not qualified, or I'm not this, or I'm not that. I mean, in DRAW, we can use everybody.
We came in the main drag, and it looked like we were driving through Venice, Italy. The roads were above water, and that was about it. And so everybody's front yards were ponds, and most people were taking canoes to get from their house to the road. It was really shocking to see.
20 volunteers from Metro Detroit and a small group of college students from Kentucky, led by this man, Greg Martin. They make up DRAW, or Disaster Relief at Work, in the town of Jean Lafitte, Louisiana, about 11 miles away from New Orleans, flooded. They're armed with big hearts.
Now, my job as the executive director is every morning I wake up, and the first thing I do is I check the Weather Channel to see if anything terrible had happened the night before, and if there were any storms that were forming that we needed to keep an eye on in the days ahead. And this storm started to form, and we could tell that it was coming somewhere in the Gulf Coast. And the Gulf Coast knows storms way too well.
Well, when we first saw the forecast, we thought we would be okay, so we were kind of like, this was probably about a week out. We were like, oh, well, this doesn't look as bad for us. And then as it got closer, it just progressively got worse. And then 2 days before, we knew it was the real deal and it was going to actually hit us.
Really, the first thing that I had heard about Isaac was that another hurricane was hitting southern Louisiana. And honestly, I didn't really think about it a whole lot until I got Greg's email. And that was actually what made me kind of get interested and kind of start looking it up. And then I started looking up that, and then I started realizing that this was like really the third major hurricane that had hit these people. And that really, I prayed about it a little bit, and that's what kind of got me interested. And that was kind of where I decided, like, you know, these people need help, and this is an opportunity for me to go and help them.
I watched a couple different newscasts and saw the water that was rushing through the cities there, and the people that were stuck in their houses, the people that were outside their houses, and I realized if nobody else goes, then those people won't get help. And the trip, I got an email, and it was free, which I think is really great, and I decided there was really no reason that I couldn't go to help out people. So.
We left our Grand Central Station, our home base, where we were staying, and drove down to a small fishing community called Jean Lafitte. Now, Jean Lafitte is right off of the water, and our team drove into Jean Lafitte a day and a half after the storm. And we drove through the main drag in town. There was one street, and it looked like we were driving through Venice, Italy, because the road was above the water, and people were on their front porches. But between the front porch and the road was 4 feet of water that was sitting. People were having to take rowboats from their front porch to the street to get where they needed to go.
It was interesting to see. I've never been on a first response disaster relief type of trip, so it was interesting to see how you go about that, and even just going there, even though we may not have had like a minute-by-minute plan, but not by having a minute-by-minute plan allows you to help the people who need the help the most. And that's what I thought was really cool about the trip. It wasn't like, oh, we had to schedule that we'd meet with these people at 3:30. It was like, hey, look, this person is in desperate need, and we don't have an agenda right now, so we're going to help them. So that was an experience that I really loved, that typically when you go on trips like that, you don't have.
And this other group, this other lady, her house had been up on stilts that had been raised, and they talked about how a dozen people they had never met had waded through the water to come over there, and they were yelling through their front door for people that were out in the street waiting in water, hey, come on over here. And they had a couple of dozen people staying in their house for a week or so until everything got drained and all. And it was just amazing how those people came together and supported each other. I've never seen it anywhere else.
The groups, we had groups here that helped feed people, groups that distributed necessities like ice and food and water, even pet supplies. And then we had some groups that helped gut homes, which is a big deal to a lot of residents. After you're flooded, you have such devastation that a lot of elderly people, and they help them got their homes out.
And by the end of the trip, the impact we had was so significant. The people that we helped were so moved. It was exactly what I had in mind when DRAW got started.
But it felt so great to know I was making a difference. And like it felt so great to physically like see the people that I'm helping. Like it's one thing to like donate money, but it's another thing to actually go there and actually like see the people and see the faces and see the damage get fixed.
I honestly didn't know the impact that this was going to have. And in talking to some of the people in the city and some of the groups, simply us being there was good for the city because they can log the volunteer hours and the national government will reimburse the city for that, or maybe it was the state government would reimburse the city for that. And simply us being there and helping gave them money to be able to start cleaning up their streets and cleaning out this nasty water and all this debris.
So without the people who come in and help us, it would take our residents so much longer to be able to get back, or even for us to be able to let them back in the community because of all the things the groups come in and help to do. So I think that without the people who come in and actually help us to get back on our feet, I mean, we might still be in a bigger mess than we are right now.
You know, when you're a part of DRAW, when you are someone who comes to the warehouse and fills buckets, when you're someone who stands up and says, I'll be a first responder after a storm, your efforts go farther than you would ever know. When you're someone who writes a check, when you're someone who spreads the word, when you're someone who helps other people find out about DRAW, those efforts may seem mundane, but they change people's lives.
It's been really cool to see this really come from an idea that Greg had to something that truly is providing relief for these people that wouldn't be receiving it otherwise. And to be a big part of that has been a really, really cool thing.
And you know, I can only imagine what this thing is going to look like in 4 or 5 years. Will it still be Michigan-based? Will it be a national base? Will there be multiple locations or one locations with some satellites around the states? Hard to tell.
This is a group for all ages. You can have elementary kids come fill a bucket and teach them that this bucket someday will be serving somebody. This will be serving a brother and sister somewhere that needs help.
That's what I feel my future is helping with DRAW. Just, there's so many things we can do. Everybody has a gift that they can bring, whether it's just going and being a good listener, being able to work a chainsaw or repair a roof.
DRAW is a transformative kind of a thing, and it's transforming lives of the people that are participating as well as those people that are receiving the help. I hope that I can be transformed as well, that I hope that my service to others in those areas can make a difference inside of me as I'm helping other people get through this very, very tough time.
After less than a year, DRAW has become a place that I think people see hope. I think DRAW has become a place where people see that they can make a difference in other people's lives in tangible ways, in real ways. I'm excited for what the next few years will hold, but I'll always remember this first year. I'll always remember taking a shot on an idea and seeing hundreds of people joining in to change people's lives. I'm hopeful for what DRAW will be, but I'm thankful for what DRAW is.
Come